Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Simon Good. I'm a professional mediator, and this is a conflict resolution training seminar that I've developed looking at the specific topic today of dealing with a neighbor's barking dog. For me, this is a new thing, a new YouTube channel that I'm starting to provide tools and strategies for dealing with conflict. So if you like this type of training and you'd like to see more of this type of thing be freely available, please consider pressing like and subscribe. As a brand new YouTuber, I would just be incredibly grateful if you'd be willing to take a moment to do that. A little bit about me. I have an MBA as well as a degree in psychology. I've got postgraduate training in dispute resolution. A lot of my time I spend these days focusing on workplace mediation, but I also do conflict coaching. I used to do quite a lot of what's called family dispute resolution, supporting families going through divorce and separation and helping them to figure out arrangements for their kids and finances. And these days I work with still topics like neighbors, dogs, and community types of disputes, but predominantly it's working with organizations, negotiating with suppliers or staff or contractors or whatever else it might be. So I suppose that's my background, is that we can find the tools to be assertive. A lot of it is to do with understanding the context and what's contributing to the conflict, as well as increasing the tools that we have in our toolkit. Additional phrases, additional options, additional ways of structuring conversations often mean that you can get to a much more positive outcome than if you took more of a default knee-jerk reaction to conflict. So I suppose if you wanted to say what's my ethos or philosophy, it is that conflict does present us these learning opportunities. And if we can take responsibility, at least for our part in the conflict, we can often find ways to improve the situation moving forward. So this is the specific scenario that I'll focus on today. We're looking at a situation where you haven't slept well for weeks. Every night there is an evil, demonic, straight from the depths of hell dog barking in your neighbor's house. I don't know if you've had this type of experience yourself, but I have. I can remember this white little fluffy dog across our back fence in the first house that we bought after we got married. And I was trying to study at the time. I was doing my MBA, and I literally was thinking about putting a sleeping tablet in a sausage and throwing it over the fence and not even caring about what possible health risks that posed for the dog. And I was just furious. It was all night, it was every night, it was all day, it was every day. And so if you haven't been in this type of situation, it's easy to underestimate just how stressful this can be, but it wears you down, it pushes your buttons, it rubs you the wrong way. And particularly if we know the neighbor, or I guess even if we don't, it's a very challenging type of conversation to know how to manage. You don't often want to upset the other person, especially if you're friends or mates with them. And at the same time, you are wanting them to do something different, like it's their problem and they need to fix it. So you decide to speak with them about it. You figure that you will wait for a good time, and then you wonder if an SMS might be better, and then you think about putting a note in their mailbox. I don't know if this sounds at all familiar for you, procrastinating, having these types of difficult conversations. It's easy to put these types of things off when we're not sure about how to go about initiating the topic. So then you get a pair of noise cancelling headphones, and one day when the batteries are flat and you've had enough, you yell so many profanities out your window at 2 a.m. that the police are called. I sort of thought maybe we could have a little bit of fun thinking about this, but I don't want to underestimate this is a really challenging topic, and a lot of people get it wrong. They raise the issue with their neighbor and they come across as too full on, too aggressive. And what it does then is increase that resistance. And all of a sudden, we're in this situation where it's me against you. So in the seminar today, I'll talk about some options that we can use for responding rather than coming across as too overbearing or critical. So the first important step would be to just think about your goals, to pause and reflect on what's important, what are the priorities, and what can wait. Do you have a good relationship with the neighbor? Are your kids friends with their kids? Do you still want to be able to have the street Christmas party? Then you'll need to find a way to communicate and do it in a calm and composed type of way, which might mean holding off for a week or two until you run into the neighbor rather than knocking at their door. Maybe doing it in that little bit more casual way would work better in your situation. So this is the stage where we really think about what's most important here, the ongoing relationship with the neighbor. What's that like? How likely is it that we'll want to hang out and be social with them, or are we in the kind of situation where everyone just leaves each other alone pretty much and goes about their day? What other issues might be connected to this? Maybe there's other things you want to ask the neighbor. Maybe you've got a whole bunch of sick kids that you're dealing with at the moment. Maybe work right now for you is particularly stressful. So it's just sorting all of these different factors that we're dealing with in our life in context or how they relate to this particular issue that we're dealing with, including conflict. And then we might think about things like, what is a good enough option? Like, what can I live with? If he puts the dog inside at night, but it still barks in the day, for example, is that something that I could accept, or is that still not enough? It's worth pausing and considering, well, what am I actually aiming for here? Because that helps us to clarify with the neighbor what we're expecting. We want to think about who needs to do what by when, and where is there some flexibility here. Maybe you're willing to help out, maybe you're willing to lower what you're asking for. I often suggest that it's better to think about these things before you go into the conversation rather than getting put on a spot and you need to make a difficult call in the midst of often a lot of pressure. The next thing that we might consider is this tool called the circle of control. The idea here is that we basically consider our options and what we would like to happen, and we kind of want to sort those elements into these three buckets. What do we just need to accept? What is just completely outside of our control? What can we influence? What are the other options that we have for including other people, for example? And what are we actually in control of here? A lot of people lie awake at night, burning themselves out, just fuming and being furious about things that are completely outside of their control. So you wish that the neighbor would just, put his dog inside at night, or you wish that he could go and get a dog trainer to train them, or that the council would have more strict rules about local residents and noise regulations, or you wish that the police would be willing to come and get involved when you've called them to ask them what to do. There are all sorts of things that you wish would be different, but where these are factors that we are completely unable to influence them, there's a limited benefit in focusing on them. They'll still come to mind. You'll still have these bounce backs of conflict from the past, or thinking about something in the future, or wishing something was different right now. But we don't want to spend time ruminating and obsessing about this. It's almost like realizing that you're in an unhealthy cycle and deciding to focus on something else. And so using this type of tool is a way to do that. If we, like, I could go and talk to the neighbor, I could talk to other people that we know in common and see if they've had an issue as well. I could write them a note and put it in their mailbox. I could contact the local council. I could knock on their door. I could shoot them a message asking them around for a coffee. We just pause and think about all these different options, which starts to help us to feel more empowered. And as you look at these list of choices, what tends to happen is that one or two of them jump out at you as much more likely to get to a good outcome than others. And so if you've got a small list, you've narrowed it down to two or three options, that's still a much better place to be than sitting there feeling overwhelmed and you're not exactly sure how to deal with this, right? We would want to think about the type of conflict. Maybe the neighbor doesn't think that the dog is barking at night, and you are aware that they are. That's an example of data conflict. And so to clear that up, we have to clarify the data. We could say something like, hey, I don't know if it's helpful, but I'd be happy to share a few recordings. I don't want to bombard you with criticism and make you feel like I'm obsessing about it. But I do have some recordings if that would be helpful. To be honest, I got so frustrated the other night, I just turned my phone on and I was wondering whether or not you knew about them, or thinking that maybe you actually weren't aware of this. Interest conflict is things like, I want this and you want this. Like, I want the neighbor's dog to be quiet. He doesn't want the dog inside making a mess. And there might not be an easy option to mutually resolve these interests, this win win type of option. Unfortunately, in many realistic situations, just isn't possible. What we actually need to do there is to decide how assertive that we want to be. We want the dog to be quiet. He wants the dog not inside making a mess. Well, one option is just being firm and saying the noise levels are out of control. You need to do something about it. Could you please investigate options? I'd be happy to share a number of a local dog trainer if that's helpful for you. Or we could be accommodating and say, look, mate, I know you've got the new house and new carpet and everything else. I don't want to make a big deal, but I just wanted to flag it with you. Do it in that much more accommodating, passive type of way. And how assertive or how passive or accommodating we decide to be really depends on the situation. In the middle is compromise, I guess, meet in the middle. The good enough option, like being quieter at night but still barking in the day. This would be an example of interest conflict, and if we're going to resolve that, we have to find a way to talk about both of our interests and then develop options for dealing with it. Values conflict is a little bit different. Maybe he doesn't care what the neighbors think and he doesn't actually respect neighbors and think that this is such a big deal at all. Maybe he's from a country where there's constant background noise and who knows what going on. Or they're from a big city, or maybe they're deaf and they haven't heard of it. It might be a cultural background type of thing. The way that we would deal with this type of values conflict is to say something like, look, I suppose we've all got different expectations around these types of things, but one thing that I'm finding really uncomfortable is just the level of noise from the barking that your dog is making. I'm wondering how this sits with you. I know different people have different ideas about what's appropriate. Were you aware of it, and was it something that you've already been focusing on, or is it something that you actually didn't think was a problem until now? I'm sort of trying to find a way to validate and acknowledge both of our values or positions that we might have, and setting up a conversation where we can focus on the future and the solution. The structural conflicts, that might be the emails back and forth haven't worked, so going and talking to them in person. And relationship conflict would be things like perhaps I've noticed the neighbor avoiding me, or they look a bit annoyed every time I see them. It might be that they're getting frustrated with me, and it's possible that there's this negative reciprocal pattern developed where I'm annoyed at their dog, so I'm a bit harsh and abrupt with them. How you going? Yeah, all right, I got to go. I'm sorry. And then they interpret that as, well, what's Simon's problem? Why is he rude? And why is he being a jerk? And so then we start to get more and more annoyed at each other. Clearing up that relationship conflict is often to do with the opposite of what's caused it. So if there's been the miscommunication, just finding a way to clear the air, or not a few negative pressured interactions. You're on the way to do something and you run into each other, but neither of you wants to stop and chat, organizing a time to grab a coffee or just talk to them while you're watering the lawn or whatever it is that you're doing. Gosh, I'm probably revealing a lot about my living in regional Australia lifestyle at the moment, but however the types of things are that you would run into your neighbor, right? But in this case, with our neighbor and the barking dog, I would leave the relationship conflict until last. And the reason for that is that relationship conflict often emerges as a symptom of the other four types of conflict, almost like the tip of the iceberg. So we're irritable and annoyed at each other. We're not saying hello in the morning. We're avoiding each other. Going out for a beer or having lunch together or organizing a nice them to come over for a coffee, that's not going to solve the problem if you think that they are in breach of the local council regulations and they don't believe that they are. That's data conflict, and so you need to resolve that conflict first. And what you'll often find is that then the relationship conflict stuff starts to clear up on its own. So we need to start often by asking for what we want. We would discuss behavior. So I wouldn't say you're being an irresponsible dog owner or, come on, mate, you need to do something about this. This is ridiculous. I'd say, I'd like you to look for options for keeping your dog quiet at night. Be specific about what's expected. You're wanting them to look for some options, or you're wanting them to organize something, or you'd like them to go and organize a trainer for the dog, or you'd like them to look into the types of collars that release the spray or whatever it is when the dog barks. What is it specifically that you're wanting them to do? And in some situations, we would put a time frame on that. Like, can you get it done in the next week or two? I guess how assertive and how specific we decide to be would depend on the context and the person that we're dealing with. But in some situations, what you want to do is outline the general consistent reasons. Here, I might say something like, it is really impacting on our well-being. It's making it incredibly difficult to sleep. And what I've noticed is that we're in a real negative spiral as a result within our family. Or, we've got young kids at the moment, getting them to sleep is difficult at the best of times. With your dog barking, it's making it even more tough. And then if we've introduced that type of reason, it's because of the young kids. We want to keep that reason general and consistent. So if they say, well, what do you expect me to do, mate? I work all day, or I'm a shift worker, or I do fly in, fly out work. I'd say something like, yeah, I get that. It does sound like that would be a difficult situation then for you to manage. On our end, the challenge is that with the young kids, when the dog's barking, they really can't get to sleep. So we repeat that reason, keeping it general and consistent. And what it does is it doesn't give the other person anything to argue against, we don't then accidentally get into a debate about the underlying facts. It's like, look, this needs to change. Let's start talking about the options versus whether or not this should happen or needs to happen, right? Demonstrate empathy if possible, and at all costs avoid criticism. I really love normalizing statements like, I don't know, for all I know, you might have already you've tried 4 or 5 different strategies and you're still going through the list of what options would work. So I'm trying to say, I know you're not a jerk and I know you're not an idiot. When I criticize someone, like, mate, this isn't good enough, what the hell are you doing over there? Of course, it's likely then to trigger defensiveness. Well, easy for you to say, mate. You know, this dog has mental health issues. It was a rescue dog, whatever. And then again, we're in this adversarial me against you type of dynamic. So really be careful to avoid criticism, whatever you do. And if you do accidentally criticize the other person, that's the kind of situation where it's really important to quickly backpedal and rectify the current conversation. I'm sorry that probably came across as a bit full on, or I didn't mean to imply that I thought you'd been doing a bad job as a dog owner. The situation really is about the noise in general, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about was the barking. I like this particular option. If you, then I. If you can look at some options for trainers, then I won't have to come and bother you anymore. Or if you're open to considering options, then I'd be willing to have a chat with some of my friends who own dogs and what they found successful. Maybe there is something that you're willing to contribute to solving the problem. Or here's what I can do for you. In order for me to do that, I need you to do this. So, yeah, look, I'm happy to accept that the dog would bark sometimes and during the day between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I do think there is some level of tolerance needed. So I can accept it barking in the day if you're able to keep it quiet at night. If you, then I. So, in terms of the actual phrasing that we would use, here is an example. Hey Jim, talking to the neighbor Jim. You might not be aware of this, but your dog is barking and it's actually pretty much constantly all night. I actually got so frustrated the other night I recorded it on my phone. I'd be happy to send them to you, but I mean, you might have already heard it at times. For me, in most situations, I think dealing with neighbors, I would want to try and lower the perceived pressure and lower the perceived stakes. So I'm wanting to do this, at least initially, a little bit casually. You can kind of hear in the tone of voice I'm using. What I'm trying to do is to lower that sense of perceived pressure. So what we want to do is a low tone of voice, slow speed, and lower volume. I wanted to talk to you about it directly rather than just emailing or complaining to the local council or something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe the dog has a health issue I'm not aware of. Again, I'm just trying to normalize this. I'm trying my best to prevent this from coming across as criticism. I really like that. I wanted to speak to you about this directly rather than just calling. What I'm doing there is affirming status. This is one of the factors that I often talk about when I'm doing de-escalation skills training is we want the other person to feel important. We want them to feel like they matter. We want them to feel like they have a valid perspective and that we acknowledge that. And so saying, I wanted to come and talk to you about it directly. I'm the team leader in my organization, and as soon as one of my team came and talked to me about this issue, I wanted to call you before I do anything else. It's like you're important, you matter. I'm so sorry that your meal didn't arrive at the restaurant. I'll talk to the staff about rushing it out as soon as I can. In the meantime, can I offer you a free glass of wine or a beer or something on the house? You matter, you're important, reinforcing their status. So we say all of that, and then here's the ask. Could you please figure out something to keep it quiet? We need to be direct. What are we specifically asking them to do? Obviously, I'm mainly focusing on after 9 p.m., although other people might be grateful if it didn't bark in the day. What do you think? What's your take on the situation? This is the missing element in the way a lot of people raise an issue with someone is that they don't invite buy-in and perspective from the other side. What's your take? What's your perspective? How do you see things? What's reasonable from where you're sitting at the moment? What do you reckon? And I guess depending on the situation, we could be more formal or more casual, but the point here is to say, let me hear your thoughts on this. Can you now speak? And we don't want to talk for too long before we give the other person a chance to talk. It's very tempting right now. I've just told you about the dog barking. I've probably got a rush of adrenaline going through my system. My heart rate's increased. My brain is probably perceiving this as threat. The reason that conflict is so stressful for us is that historically it's been risky. If I'm in conflict with my tribe and we're cavemen, they might kill me and take my beautiful, wonderful cave that I'm really happy in and I really like. I like my cave. Please don't take my cave. So annoying the neighbor historically has not been a trivial small thing. It's been like a matter of life and death. And it's not surprising then that our brain responds to social conflict in a very similar way that it responds to threats of physical pain. Things like rejection, standing out, someone not listening to you, being interrupted and talking over the top of you, embarrassment, shame. These are the kind of things that really affect us and it causes us to escalate. And if you're in a situation where you've just knocked on your neighbor's door and you've said to them, hey, mate, I want to talk to you about your dog that's barking, it's really annoying, you're worked up. And what that means is that the rational part of your brain's not going to be working at its full capacity, which means that you're not going to be choosing your words carefully. And it's very tempting just to keep talking. I don't know if you're the kind of person that does that, but I know a lot of people who come to conflict resolution training, they have a really hard time just being quiet. And one of the things that we practice is saying what needs to be said and then shutting up. Hey, mate, your dog's barking. I wanted to come and talk to you about it directly. I'm not actually sure what would work, but I was wondering if maybe you could look into some options. What do you reckon? We give them a chance to say yes or no, or I was aware of it, or I wasn't, or actually I've tried 6 things, or this dog's a rescue dog, it's got mental health issues, it's been abused. We don't want them to be sitting there with what they think is a very valid reason and excuse for too long, because what happens is they become a volcano. The pressure builds and the pressure builds, and when it erupts, it can often come out as anger. So, what do you think? It's a really important part there. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't overstepping that in terms of the significance. So, I think using that type of phrase is already probably more likely to get to a more positive outcome, I'd say, than the default way that a lot of us would deal with conflict. Here's another example, though. Here might be we've already talked to Jim about it. The dog has been barking. I would suggest probably 3 or 4 days, maybe a week would be a good time frame to leave it before you raise it again. But I wouldn't probably leave it more than 2 weeks. It's very unlikely if you leave it more than 2 weeks that the other person's still thinking about this issue, right? So we need to escalate. You should decide on the timing and maybe get a second opinion if that's something that's helpful. Talk to your wife and say, do you think I'm overreacting here? I know for me, I tend to be a little bit more sensitive to annoying noise or whatever it is. So here's an option for being a little bit more firm. Hi, Jim. I'm not sure if you can hear it inside your house, but your dog has been barking again. It's pretty much constantly for the past 3 nights, and it's making it impossible to sleep. Again, this is this general, firm, consistent reason. It's making it impossible to sleep. Last time we spoke, it sounds like you were going to consider options. Have you made any progress? I'm stating the facts. Last time we talked, this is what you said you were going to do. How's it going? And I'm inviting again his input before jumping to a conclusion about it's obvious that you haven't done anything. I don't want to say, obviously, what you're doing is not working, you have to fix it or else. Of course, that feels like a threat because it literally is a threat. And what we get as a result in many cases is defensiveness and resistance. So we've talked to Jim about it now a couple of times, and we're probably getting close to the point where we need to give him an ultimatum. It's like enough is enough. I'm not just going to sit here not sleeping because my neighbors. Gosh, it's funny, isn't it? Even role playing what I would be feeling, it's tempting to say something like, my neighbor obviously doesn't care what impact they're having on their neighbors. When we're getting worked up and escalated, what tends to happen is that our brain looks for options to simplify things. It's trying to break these different conflicts or other situations that we're dealing with into categories and basically develop a motor plan for dealing with it. And so conflict is probably something that we put in the category of something like threat. And so what often happens is the type of response that we would get to a threat. If you've seen bear tracks outside your cave, your beautiful cave that luckily no one has stolen from you, it's good that you keep remembering that there might be a bear outside, and every little sound that comes, your brain's going to be hyper focused on the bear because it's in this category of threat. The problem is that with conflict, Jim probably gets put in the same category as a bear that might come and attack me. So my brain keeps reminding me about Jim and remembering that annoying conversation and the smug look on his face when he thought he was so good and he obviously didn't care what impact he was having on other people. or thinking about what it's going to be like going and knocking on his door tomorrow to raise it with him. So self-care is really important. What that does is that it opens up our rational bit of our brain to focus on strategically responding rather than reacting. So here, what we want to do is give an ultimatum, and the best way to use ultimatums is to frame it as a choice. We put the negative option, the thing we don't want them to do first, and then the positive option, the thing that we do want them to do second, because that has the most prevalence in their memory and attention. If your dog keeps barking, I'm going to make a formal complaint to the strata committee or the local council or whatever. Or if you can find a way to keep your dog quiet, then you won't have any of that to worry about. We frame it as a choice and we put the positive option second. If you can find a way to keep the dog quiet, if you could keep the dog inside at night, if you could organize a trainer, whatever it is that we're asking him to do. So here's an option of framing that here. Hi, Jim. Mate, I've raised the issue of your dog barking constantly through the night previously. It's reached a point now where it just can't continue, or I can't tolerate it, or I need to consider other options. If you're not able to stop the dog barking, I'll need to call the council and get their ranger team involved. I know they have a specific team set up to work on issues like barking dogs. They also have specific guidelines regarding noise regulations. Or if you're able to stop it barking, then I'll stop bothering you and you won't have the council or the ranger team involved and none of that stuff to worry about. You can sort of see the way that we frame it is that positive option second. If you can find a way to stop it barking, then this is the more positive consequence to you. If we frame it like that, we're much more likely to get buy-in from the other party about what we're asking them to do. So please consider self-care if you're dealing with barking dogs, especially if it's impacting your sleep. What this tends to do is throw us into a negative spiral where we're not sleeping well, then our perception becomes affected. I mean, our perception is always affected, but it becomes more affected. And so we tend to think more pessimistically, we're more likely to react, and more irritable, generally speaking. So whether it's rest or an opportunity to reset after you've just had a difficult argument, having a shower or going for a jog or something might be a way to just deal with some of that buildup of energy. What works for you in terms of finding a way to recharge? And how can you realign and refocus? Don't spend the evening stewing about Jim and what a jerk he's been. Spend time with your kids, kick a soccer ball, go and do something, write a song, do something creative that stimulates you, buy a new book, look for a new bit of something for the house that you've been meaning to purchase. Reorient yourself, realign, recalibrate. Well, thank you so much for watching. I wonder how you found this way of doing conflict resolution training. What I'm planning to do is deliver these types of seminars maybe roughly once a week, all freely available, and I intend to put them up on my website. I really like a YouTube channel called Chris Doe, and he often says if I can get a certain amount of likes, I'm going to leave this training up and make it freely available. For me, as a brand new YouTuber, my goal realistically is probably something like 10 likes. So if I can get 10 likes on this video, I'm going to leave it up. If I don't get 10 likes, then I still might leave it up, to be perfectly honest, but I might not. But please let me know. Do you have a situation, a question about what I've covered today, or a situation or a personality that you'd like me to cover on a future episode, a seminar like this, talking about options for responding? Please put it in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening. All the best dealing with the conflicts in your own life for now. Bye.